Hi everyone. I actually had intended to do a little live broadcast on posture again today, but since there's been so much talk about vocal injury, especially in singing related forums and so on, also in the press over the last week, I thought I'd do a little broadcast on that today. As many of you probably know, Adele has injured her voice. And as soon as that came out, basically everyone had an opinion about it, and we heard quite often, yeah, if she only had better technique, literally that wouldn't have happened. And the problem is that she didn't really watch what she was doing, she's over-singing and so on and so on. The problem with that is that you actually don't really know what the problem is. You should really not pass judgment if you don't know the singer, if you're not on their team, if you don't know anything about their voice really, if you don't know what type of injury they actually have, and we don't know that just yet. And then you also have those people who say, yeah, that classical technique would have prevented this, and that vocal injury is far less likely to happen to classical singers, which is quite frankly not true. It can happen really to any singer at any time. It also happens to singers with really good technique. And it's usually not just down to one factor. Okay, so when we're talking about the potential for vocal injury, what you get is to basically sum up risk factors in a way. And it can be down to lifestyle choices we're making, smoking, maybe drinking, maybe being quite sociable, talking too much, that type of thing. Also maybe being tired and maybe singing when we shouldn't be singing. Then you have this other big bracket of vocal load. So especially for a singer like Adele, who basically sings a lot, more than most of us ever will sing. And the schedules are so packed that there's no recuperation periods. And even if you have quite good technique, you might get into trouble. And in fact, classical singers have went into trouble over that, or have gone into trouble like that. For instance, people like Rolando Villazon, Nathalie Dessay, even Luciano Pavarotti had nodules. He recovered again, but they all had vocal problems. And if it was down to the fact that only classical technique would prevent vocal problems, they certainly wouldn't have these problems. Fact is that in the classical community, people don't tend to talk that much about it, and it tends to be less publicized. But if you listen to some of the surgeons, who obviously don't sort of give too much away, but if they tell you how many of their clients or patients are actually classical singers, you would be quite surprised. It's just, I think we're living in a bit of a blaming and shaming culture, and it always seems to be the singer's fault for not doing something quite right and not doing it quite the way they should have done it, when in fact they maybe did everything right they could do right from a technical point of view, but maybe they just had a really bad day, maybe they were tired, maybe they had acid reflux, which brings me to the next sort of big group, health factors in general. So acid reflux is a health factor. If you already previously had vocal injury, that can be a factor as well. Tiredness can be a factor. Not really, as we call it, getting into your body can be a factor. If you're maybe having a body injury of some sort, if your back is injured or so, and you maybe can't bring up the support levels you normally would, all these things come into play. Of course, having less than optimal technique can be a problem, and it can heighten your chances of getting vocal injury, but it's not the only reason. And we shouldn't assume that someone gets a vocal injury just because they have bad technique. Also, there always seems to be this divide between classical singing and contemporary singing, and in fact someone said that online, that literally those singers who shout and scream, they're at a much higher risk. which quite frankly also isn't necessarily true, because there's also such a thing as genetics playing into it. Some people literally have vocal cords of steel and other people don't. And those people who don't, they might be doing everything technically right and they're still at risk for injury. So what I'm trying to say with this, essentially, we shouldn't put the blame on the singer. If you want to put the blame on someone, or like in the case of Adele, for instance, we should rather think if lacking recuperation periods, if pushing singers so far that they basically don't feel like they have a choice to cancel, for instance, when they feel they're slightly under the weather, which she thankfully did at the end, but it was probably already too late. That's something we should think about. So maybe, are the labels to blame? Are the managements and the agents to blame? So really maybe just think about that and don't be so quick to pass judgment in technical terms and have this idea that if someone gets a vocal injury, it has to be bad technique, because that's not true. I'll tell you something now, you can actually injure your voice by just sneezing or coughing wrongly. So that might actually give you an idea that it's maybe not just the technical side of things. So really think about the lifestyle, your health issues, your schedule, your vocal load in general. School teachers, for instance, very prone to vocal injury, and people tend to feel, I don't want to say quite sorry for them, but no one would actually say, oh my God, they had it coming. Like in the case of a singer like Adele, for instance. Maybe see singers more like athletes. I know that's a bit overused, but it's really quite true. If you think of singers in that way, and you compare it to sports people who are also, due to basically just what they're doing, they're much more likely to injure themselves. And it's not necessarily that they injure themselves just because they have bad form or bad technique. It just literally comes with a job. So I'd like to just encourage you all to not be too judgmental and just really think it could happen to you as well. And it happens to classical singers, and it happens to pop singers, and it happens to a lot of singers who have actually quite good technique. And unless we stop this blaming and shaming culture, singers will feel they can't come forward with the injuries they had. And they feel like that's being put onto me, and I'm lacking something. And that's never a good thing. So maybe have a little thought about that, and then hopefully see you again soon, maybe with the Posture podcast. Bye-bye.